Sacred heights calling, sacred heights calling, to the silence, to the light, sacred heights calling, sacred heights. Sacred heights calling, sacred heights.
I am Brother Paschal Jordan. I am one of the monks at Monks in Benedict. And I have been here for a little over 60 years. May I tell you something about my journey? I knew that I wanted to be a monk when I was about 17 years old. You see, a number of factors came into being. I went to a Jesuit secondary school in Guyana, where I was born. The atmosphere was congenial. Religion was not forced upon you, but it was in the atmosphere. As a matter of fact, in my class, there were several others, at least 3 others, who became ministers of religion. One of them being a Muslim who became a Mulvi and a Mulana. So I used to read the early Thomas Merton books, Elected Silence, The Waters of Siloé, and those books spoke about monastic life, and I was intrigued. And one of the Jesuit priests recognized that I was intrigued. He was my English teacher. And he took me to the public library, and we found more books by Thomas Merton. So there was that. Then there was another element which had to do with athletics. You see, St. Stanislaus College in Guyana used to have intercollegiate sports with the Abbey School at Monks in Benedict. Every 2 years, either the Abbey boys and the monks would come to Guyana, or the athletes from my school and the Jesuits, they would come to Trinidad. So I was an athlete. I was a sprinter, so 100 meters, 200 meters, and then hurdles and long jump. But I was not good enough to be chosen on the team because they wanted all-rounders, you know, cricket and football as well. But I met the monks coming from Trinidad, Father Cuthbert, Brother Vincent, Brother Camillus, and then I met Brother Gabriel also. He came to Guyana. And that made me feel, you know, this is what I would like to do with my life. And then in 1961, I met then Brother Hildebrand Green. Hildebrand eventually became our abbot, but at that time he had just made solemn profession, and they gave him a little holiday, so he came back to his native Guyana, and he came to our parish church, and seeing this tall man in the habit, I thought, aha, that is what I want to be like. I remember telling my mother one night, we were alone at home, My brother had already gone to university in Scotland, and Dad had gone, he had played tennis and he was liming with his fellows at the club. And my sister Sheila was already married and living in Trinidad. So Mom and I were alone that night, and I told her, I want to be a monk. She had a big teapot full of Ovaltine, and she dropped the teapot and clasped her head and said, oh my God, it's those priests at Fatima Church. I want my grandchildren. And I, like a perfect little prig, said, well, you should have had more children. And she gave me a box, wham, across my face. And I could not understand what that was about. Evidently, it stirred up pain. Long afterwards, I discovered that between my brother and I, 4 years difference, there had been 2 miscarriages. And then after me, I had a sister, but she died as an infant. So my telling my mother that she should have had more children, that just kind of opened wounds which I did not know about. Anyhow, when Dad came home, she told him, and he kind of smiled and said, look, he's going to a Catholic school, he's fallen in love with the priest, it will pass. And it didn't pass. And then I entered into a conversation by letter with Brother Hildebrand and Brother Vincent. And then I applied and was accepted. But that was in the year, that was early year 1964. I was not quite 19. I was 19, but not quite 20. And we had the music festival. And I did very well playing Chopin and that kind of thing, and I won the championships. And I remember that night, my girlfriend said, I hear you going to join monastery. What is going to happen to me? Well, my response was one of the sins that I have regretted ever since. I said to her, don't bother, man, don't bother. There's more fish in the sea. I realized afterwards, you never tell a woman that. Oh my God. Oh my God. Anyhow. So yes, I knew I was in school, and I knew that I wanted to be a monk around the age of 17. Opposition? Well, after the initial outburst of my mother, we didn't really talk about it until it was really time for me to go. So I entered the monastery on the 17th of August, Monday the 17th of August, 1964. And a few days before that, my mother said to me, child, what is going to happen to your music? Because I was reasonably good at the piano. And she had high hopes for me to progress. And I had done very well at A-levels, and my dad was interested, and it was kind of pushing me to do English literature as an elective. But you know, I answered my mother saying, looking back on it now, I think I was a perfect little prig. I said, I'm giving it up to Jesus. I'm giving my music to Jesus. Well, you know, I've discovered that Jesus accepted that. And in a way that I never expected, I have discovered that I have been using music to preach the gospel in my own way.
Glory and honor, thanksgiving and praise be to the Lord our God.
So all praise to Jesus for that. Other opposition? Not really, not really. In myself? No. I knew what I wanted. The only thing that I discovered was, and I don't think I was quite prepared for that, was the makeup of the community that I entered. The majority of the monks were Dutch. And then there were some locals, some Caribbean people. But when I entered, you see, my group was a group of 10. And 8 months before me, there was a group of 8 young people, all Caribbean people. And so there was this growing Caribbean presence in the monastery, which I think was a good thing, But there were some tensions about that. But anyhow, there we are. Regrets? No. I mean, I remember that after I came back from Paris, I had gotten a scholarship and I had gone to Paris to study liturgical music and liturgy. And that went very well. And it equipped me for the work that I had to do in future. But I remember when I came back, I was about 27. And one of my friends, my school friends, we were very close. And I had thought that he was going to be a priest, but then he got married. And I remember thinking, oh, I could have been he. And then I discovered through letters that he was thinking, oh, I could have been he. But as it turned out, we were both very happy in our vocation. Yes. So there we are. And so I find myself now, 62 years later, still in the monastery by God's grace, and still somehow being able to preach the gospel through music. And I thank God for that. I thank God for that. I really have, if I may put it this way, I have found my niche in a way. Because the monastic life, you know, the pillars of the monastic life of prayer, work, hospitality, community living, those resonate very deeply with me. And I realize that the old saying that grace builds on nature is true. It's true. Because I recognize that I am kind of, by personality and temperament, predisposed to that way of life, a way of prayer, work, hospitality, community life. I would even like to add that I have discovered that friendship has been the special gift from God to me in the monastic life. Not just friendship among the monks, but a whole circle of friends all over the world in different ways. Some music, some Bible, but some just meeting people and connecting. I think of the words of St. Elred of Rivers. He's a monastic saint of the 12th century, who took the words of Jesus and the gospel, and when Jesus says, St. John says, God is love. St. Elred said, God is friendship. And that has been my experience. So, a rich emotional life, a rich life of connecting with people, a rich life of connecting with God and the whole Benedictine spirituality, and a sense of, how shall I put that, rightness, that I am, in fact, where God wanted me to be. Praise God. Well, my younger self was called Jerry. You see, I was baptized Edward Fitzgerald Jordan. And from the Fitzgerald, everybody called me Jerry. It was only when I came to the monastery, then we were all given, in those days, a monastic name. And Paschal he was a Spanish Franciscan, St. Paschal Baylon. So, Jerry, the impulse that you felt around the age of 17 was in fact correct, was in fact what God was asking of you. Do you remember how you prayed to God saying, I am attracted to this monastic life, and how you asked God specifically to give you a monastic vocation? You remember that? Well, who would have thought that you would have lived so long? But now, Jerry, it really has been God's gift. God's gift. And your impulse has been good and has been, I don't want to say justified, but it has been confirmed by God. So give thanks for what began and what is now, not without difficulty, not without suffering, but that's life, that's life. So we give thanks to God.